Hey guys, welcome. It's nice to see you this morning. We're going into this is our second week in Proverbs, and I love studying. So this is not really my wheelhouse. Like I kind of focus a lot on my biblical study in the New Testament and a lot of Paul's letters, but I just love how the whole Bible is connected, and when you are able to kind of step back and through the enabling of the Holy Spirit in our lives, connect the dots of what God was doing through people. It's so encouraging. And so we're going to kind of turn our thoughts and our minds to Proverbs and wisdom for living, giving us wise choices in our lives. And so we're just going to look at a few moments. These are not biblical Proverbs. These are just some things I looked up. Proverbs are adages on relationships, and this is some of the stuff I found. So Walter Winchell says, a real friend is one who walks in when the rest of the world walks out. Benjamin Franklin said, if you would be loved, you have to love and be lovable. Right? If you would be loved, you need to love and be lovable. A Turkish proverb is, no road is long with good company. Come on.
That's good.
No road is long with good company. They may forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Because I know you guys forget all the time what I say. I forget about it. But I think that the way that we make each other feel, I think we don't forget. People are lonely because they build walls instead of bridges. Like this one. A relationship is like a house. When the light bulb burns out, you don't go and buy a new house. You fix the light bulb. Mahatma Gandhi says, no one can hurt me without my permission. And the Swedish proverb, I know my wife talks about this often, shared joy is a double joy, and shared sorrow is a half a sorrow.
That's good.
Right? What are proverbs? They're small sayings with large meanings. Like they invoke in us like a deeper understanding. There's something that kind of comes from wisdom. They're these little tiny pithy sayings, right? They're only a few words, but they bring these deep meanings. And so the Bible has this awesome book of these proverbs. And it's a part of what we call the biblical wisdom literature. So you have books like Job, Song of Songs or Song of Solomon. You have Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. Right? They give us this kind of rounded understanding of wisdom. And Proverbs is a book. It starts off, this is Proverbs 1:1. It says, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. And really, King Solomon is the source of Israel's wisdom tradition. See, Israel had a bunch of leaders. A bunch of them. But they all kind of point back to David and Solomon. David was the great conquering king, and Solomon is the great wise king. And what's beautiful about both David and Solomon is they were dad and son, and they were kind of opposite ends of the spectrum when it came to a lot of things. But they both share in common this direct pointing towards Jesus. So the best of David and the best of Solomon are combined in an understanding in the best way when we look at Jesus. A conquering king who's also wise, one who's got the power and strength to protect, but also has the wisdom to guide his people. And so Solomon is when people talk about kind of the traditions of wisdom within the Jewish faith in Israel as a kingdom, they point to Solomon. And right, First Kings tells us Solomon was the smartest dude in the world, right? He was Einstein plus 10, right? God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight. The narrative around Solomon's life is when God asked him, hey, you can ask for anything and I'll grant it to you. Solomon didn't ask for riches, he didn't ask for power, he didn't ask for long life, he asked for wisdom. And God, pleased at the request, granted him wisdom. And so the wisdom that Solomon has is not just Solomon's alone because he was so smart, but it was a gift from God into Solomon's life. And so Solomon often, when you read through Proverbs, is always reflecting us back to the wisdom that flows from the kingdom of God, from God's character itself. And so God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Come on, what a great description. You put that on my tombstone. And here lies John, He had an understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Right? And his fame spread to the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. And here in Proverbs, we have about 350. So that's kind of the context, the immediate context of Proverbs. I don't want to dive too deep into it because I have, like I said, a bunch of slides to get through. But one of the things when we're going to look at a bunch of Proverbs today on a particular subject, the subject of relationships. But we have to remember that Proverbs are based upon principles and not on promises. Like what happens when we get squirrely in when you kind of quote in your own mind or quote to people Proverbs about, hey, because often it'll say, like, if you train up your child in the ways of God, when they grow old, they won't stray from them. That's not always the case, right? It's not always the case. And so it doesn't mean like if your child strayed from God, you didn't do the first part. You missed out on raising them up in the commandments of God. That's not what it means. It's about a principle that God governs us as a community. He kind of guides us as people. And basically we're to understand it not simply individualistically, which us as Americans, that's the first thing we think, oh, God's talking directly to me. But it's more about, these are the principles at place that if you are a community of God and you raise your children in a healthy, God-fearing community, then your children will reflect the character in which you raise them. Right? Not all of them. Maybe there will be ones here and there that struggle with it or chafe under the weight of it. But children often want to emulate their parents. And so Proverbs deal with principles and not promises. And so keep that in the back of our mind as we're looking at this. And this underlying idea is this. Wisdom is a life reflecting the nature of God. So to be wise and to be godly are the same thing. So in Proverbs is saying this is the best way to live your life. You can live your life a bunch of different ways. You have freedom of choice. You can choose all sorts of different things. But if you submit yourself to God's character in your life, this is the best way for you to live your life well. And so in Proverbs is a book of this is how we live our lives well in a bunch of different directions. And the book starts off with this kind of narrative of a father, Solomon, speaking to his son and saying, let me give you good advice. Let me give you wisdom for your life. It's important that we remember that the kind of overarching understanding is a father speaking to his son, because women don't always show up in the best of lights in this, in Proverbs, right? And so before we feel like, oh, it's just patriarchal and the Bible's anti-women, like if you got a mother and she wrote a letter to her daughter, she would probably be like, hey, watch out for those guys that come in your life talking all smooth and having all... She would give a lot of advice about boys and men who were interested in the wrong things, right? That's the way fathers talk to sons and mothers talk to daughters. And so when we see women or females or women addressed in Proverbs, you can flip it around and say if a mother was speaking to a daughter, she'd be talking about men in the same way. And so we're going to look at that a couple times here, because there are some Proverbs that you like to, as a husband, quote to your wife, that you got to be careful about, because the truth is you can flip it right back around on yourself, and it's a double-edged sword that cuts both ways. So, themes in Proverbs. Okay, so I've identified 4 major themes. Now, there's Proverbs that deal with all sorts of different things, but there's 4 major themes that you can pick out when you look through Proverbs. And I call them this: wisdom in relationships, wisdom in finances, wisdom through temptation, and wisdom in your words. Okay, so we're going to go through each one of these. And so this week we're going to start with wisdom in relationships. How to be wise when it comes to our relationships. Okay, so here's the truth. Many of your most difficult issues that you face in your life center around relationships that have gone squirrely in one way or another. And often we blame the other person, right? And we're always like, man, if that other person is a little bit different. We have to remember relationships take 2 people, and you're an equal part of this thing. So when we're dealing with relationships and wisdom in relationships, it's really important for us to reflect on ourselves. Because here's the truth. You can't really change other people. I don't know if you know that, but you don't really have control over other people. They're going to do what they want to do. You know, if you don't believe it, have kids, right? Kids will do what they're going to do, regardless of what you think they should do. And if you try to control them, it's often more heartache for you than it really is beneficial for them. So, instead of focusing on other people, which I love to do, and if Facebook is correct, you guys love to do it too, right? But instead of focusing on other people and what they need to do to change, Proverbs really turns the focus on us and say, hey, you need to really kind of focus on what you can control. Because you can't control the world around you, but you can control the way you respond to it. And so Proverbs says a lot about relationships. And so this morning, instead of like writing all these things down, oh yeah, I can't wait to share this with someone else. I can't wait to let them know that they need to change the way they think. Okay, before we do that, hit the brakes a little bit and let it speak to your own heart. Okay, so principles to wisdom in relationships. So some of these principles, they work with husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, they work with father and mother to children, they work with co-workers, they work with any kind of relationship in your life. Brothers and sisters, friendships. So a lot of these principles, it's not just about, oh, this is a marriage principle or this is a friendship principle. These are principles that govern the way we deal with relationships. And wisdom means if you do these things, if you put these principles into play in your life, we are going to be significantly better. This is the best way for us to live well and reflect the nature of God in the way that we relate to one another. And if you remember in the New Testament, Jesus is commanding his disciples. He says, you know what? The number one way that people can tell that you are connected to God is the way that you treat one another. They'll know that we are Christians by our love for one another. So the wisdom in relationships we need to listen to. And what's all really interesting is often what they're quoting in the New Testament comes from the Proverbs and Old Testament wisdom in relationships. So here's principle number one. Relationships shape us. So be careful. Okay. Your relationships shape who you are. So be careful with the ones that you have in your life. Both in cultivating the healthy ones and putting yourself in relationships that you shouldn't be in. All right, so we're going to go quickly through these, but I'm just trying to give you kind of an overarching understanding of this. Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. You want to be wise, put yourself around wise people. Okay. A violent person entices their neighbors and leads them down a path that is not good. Are there violent people in your life? My son, if sinful men entice you, do not give in to them. My son, do not go along with them. Do not set foot on their paths. These men lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush only themselves. Such are the paths of all who go after ill-gotten gain. It takes away the life of those who get it. So most of us aren't enticed by people who want to be highway bandits. So what does this mean for you? Right? What about this? Such are the paths of all who go after ill-gotten gain. Ill-gotten gain is a constant in life. There are ways for you to push yourself forward in life that aren't paths of integrity, paths of character. And if you put yourselves around those type of people, those pathways seem legitimate and seem like a possibility for you. The Proverbs, the wisdom of God says, be careful. Because if you follow those paths, it takes away the life of those who walk that path. One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin. But there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Be careful about the friendships that you cultivate. For the lips of the adulterous woman drip honey, okay? For the lips of the man who wants to tempt you from your commitments drip honey. Right? Her speech is smoother than oil, but in the end she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. She gives no thought to the way of life. Be careful about the people who entice you, who capture your attention, who cause you to want to follow them. Think hard and long about their character and what following people or connecting with people will mean for you. I heard a preacher one time say one of the things he does on a regular basis is thinks, if I cheat on my spouse, what will it cost me? Goes through it over and over again. Because in the moment, he says, I want there to be muscle memory. So in the moments when temptation comes, so whatever that temptation is for you, in the moment when that temptation comes, you don't have to try to think through those consequences. You've already done it. You've done it over and over and over again. Say, no, that way is not the way of life. That path goes down to death and leads straight to the grave. It destroys my family, it destroys my reputation, it destroys my opportunities, it destroys my ability to speak with power and encouragement. It takes away my ministry and my life. No, that's not the path I want to head down. My sons, my daughters, be careful about who you allow to entice you. Proverbs 22:24 says this, do not make friends with a hot-tempered person, and do not associate with one who is easily angered, or you may learn their ways and get yourself ensnared. Better to live on the corner of the roof of a roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife. Right, that's a fun one. I like to quote this. Problem is here is, I don't know, you guys ever met quarrelsome wives? You don't have to raise me. But generally, there's a way that they got there. Most people don't come into their marriages as a quarrelsome husband or quarrelsome wife. For me, I think one of the things is this screams to us, right? If we're gonna focus on ourselves, I like to focus on the quarrelsome wife. We're like, I don't want to have a quarrelsome wife. Well, then don't allow your relationships to sour like that. Work on them. Because they don't become quarrelsome overnight. It takes time to embitter people to each other. Don't allow that to happen. If you see it happening, deal with the issues now. Why? Because it will create a house that is not really worth living in. Amen. So although it's fun to quote to my wife, it's really a proverb to me. Don't allow my wife to be embittered. Don't allow her to, don't let those things go unsaid. Don't let the harshness of your relationship get worse and worse. Deal with it. Deal with the issues that create an unhospitable house. Drive out the mocker, and out goes strife. Quarrels and insults are ended. Don't put yourself in a place of cynical, mocking people. A foolish child is a father's ruin, and a quarrelsome wife is like a constant dripping on a leaky roof. There's a lot of these, so I actually tried to sort these out. The righteous choose their friends carefully. The righteous choose their friends carefully. It's interesting because most of us, if we put a list of what makes you righteous, choosing friends carefully probably wouldn't make that list for most of us. But the wisdom of Solomon, given to him by God, says, listen, if you want to count yourself in the part of righteousness, then you need to choose your friends carefully. But the way of the wicked lead them astray. The people matter. Your relationships matter, right? As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens one another. We are shaped by each other. So be careful about your relationships. So this is not just a Proverbs thing. You can see this reflected in the New Testament as well. 2 Corinthians 16 says, do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can the light have with darkness? This isn't just saying, hey, don't hang out with people who don't agree with everything you say. It's like, be careful how deep and intimate you allow people who have such a dramatically different understanding of the path of life, what that means in your life. Right? Don't be yoked together with an unbeliever. Be careful who you allow to have intimate access with your life. Right? I mean, so just think of like yoke is how they would put two oxen together and they would put this yoke on top of them and like they would connect underneath. And so as one ox would move to the right, both of them would move to the right. If one moved to the left, they both would move to the left. Saying, don't put yourself in that position where someone else has that kind of power over the direction in which you head, unless you know you're both headed in the same direction. Okay? So Romans 16, 17 to 18. For such men are slaves, not... Oh, I think I skipped. I did. Did I? No? Come on. There you go. Now I urge you, brethren, keep your eyes on those who cause dissension and hindrance, contrary to the teachings from which you learned, and turn away from them. He's writing to the church. He's warning the church. He says, be careful about those in your community that you allow access into something as precious as your faith, who are there to cause dissension and to create hindrances. For such men are slaves not to the Lord Jesus Christ, but their own appetites. And by their smooth and flattering speech, they deceive the hearts of the unsuspecting. Be on guard with who you allow in your lives. And again, my mom used to quote this to me, 1 Corinthians 15:33. Don't be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. Relationship shape us. So be careful. This is wise living, reflective of who God is. Okay. Principle number 2. Good relationships are precious. Guard and care for them. Okay. So cultivate and guard those good relationships. He who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord. So he who finds a wife finds what's good. So don't let her become that which makes you want to live on the roof, the peak of your house, right? Cultivate the relationships in your life. Protect them, guard them against those things that would cause dissension and brokenness. The way of a fool seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. Husbands, listen to advice. Wives, listen to advice. Disciple your children, for in that there is hope. Do not be a willing partner to their death. You see the opposite here? The opposite directions here is you can discipline your children, or you can be a willing party to their death. That's what the wise choice is here. So often, like I struggle, like I don't want to discipline my kids because I don't want to be mean to them, right? But he's saying, look, discipline the people you love. Why? Because that's what God does to us. The Bible says that God disciplines those he cares about. I used to have a coach that says, if I'm yelling at you, it means I believe in you. Because if I didn't believe in you, I'd let you do whatever you wanted. So discipline the people your children, because you love them. A wife of noble character is her husband's crown, but a disgraceful wife is like a decay in his bones. I'll just leave that there. Okay, drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. What does this mean? What do you think? It doesn't seem all that wise, right? Like what? Right? It means keep your eyes on what God's provided you. Quit looking at your neighbor's wife. Quit looking at what your friends have in their lives. Like you deal with the relationships that God has brought into your life, especially those good ones. Right? And don't be thinking, man, maybe I can go, get the resource, get what I need other places. No, God has provided you with what you have. Drink the water from your own cisterns. Right? Don't be, just because you can, finding the things that you need in other places. Especially in marriage, this is a huge one. Drink water from your own cistern and running waters from your own wells. A brother wronged is more unyielding than a fortified city. Disputes are like the barred gates of a citadel. This is a warning against hurting those who are close to you. He says, listen, when you hurt someone who's let you in, it can become so difficult to undo that. It's kind of like the saying that we have. It's very hard it's really hard to build bridges we burn, right? It's really hard to rebuild bridges that you burn. Be careful about the bridges that you burn. Here's another one. A rod and reprimand impart wisdom, but a child left undisciplined disgraces his mother. What a person desires is unfailing love. Better to be poor than a liar. It's better to not have the resources you need to survive in life than to be a person of low character. Cultivate your relationships. Children's children, so grandchildren. Come on. All right, crown to the aged. I'm sorry. If we had aged people, we could tell them. Yeah. But children's children are a crown to the aged, and parents are the pride of their children. Live a life, both as child and parent, that your family can be proud of. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. These relationships, good relationships, are a gift from God. Guard and protect them. Here's other biblical examples of this. 1 Thessalonians 12 says, "Therefore, encourage one another and build each other up, just as you are in fact doing." He says in Ephesians, "Do not let unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that they may benefit those who listen." Right? Careful about the way you talk to one another. Careful about the way you treat one another. It matters. Take care of the relationships that God has brought in your lives. Don't be always looking for new ones. Take care of the ones that He's brought you. They are a gift from God. And if you see them not as something that you own, but you're a steward of, right? You don't let unwholesome talk. Don't let criticism and harshness come from you. But only look at what building up relationships does. This is my people. This is how people tell that you are connected to God. John 13 says, "A new commandment I give you. Love one another." That's not the new commandment. The new commandment is this: love one another as I have loved you. You also must love one another. Right? Treat people the way that Christ treats us. And this is how we govern this kind of wise relationships. Good relationships are precious. Guard and care for these. What are the good relationships in your life that have gone unguarded or uncared for? We all have them. And what are the ones that need a little bit more attention in our lives? What are those good relationships? And principle number 3, the last one. In your relationships, strive to be someone of godly character. All these are connected, right? We see that. But when it comes to you in your relationship, strive to be someone of godly character. We could use a bunch that we've already read for this, but whoever would foster love covers over an offense, but whoever repeats the matter separates close friends. Right? Don't be someone who separates close friends. Be one who covers over offense. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Honesty, integrity, and relationships matters. Right? Live out, and it doesn't mean this doesn't give us, sometimes people will quote this just because they want to insult you. Right? Wounds of a friend. They're like, yeah, I don't really feel like you're being a friend. But remember, it's the same principles. Like, you can either discipline your kids or you can be an active party in their destruction. Right? As a friend, you can say, hey, I feel like maybe that relationship with that person at work is getting a little too close. And I think you need to just be careful. That's what real friends do, instead of being like, hey, you do you. Right? No, that's being a party to their destruction. So the wounds of a friend can be trusted, but you have to earn the friendship. You can't just go around wounding people because you know you're right. Because that doesn't help. Where there is strife, there is pride, but wisdom is found from those who take advice. Be careful about the way that we approach people. I think humility is an underlying constant in wisdom. Whoever derides their neighbor has no sense, but the one who has understanding holds their tongue. On Facebook, on social media. Hold your tongue, especially when the contrary means deriding your neighbors and people in your community. Do not envy the violent or choose any of their ways. Okay, so don't envy those in your life who are prospering without character. Okay. So violence, we don't really see violence. I mean, this was a different time when Solomon was writing, but we do see those who have gained prosperity through a lack of character. He says, don't envy them. The Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked, but he blesses the home of the righteous. Let me ask you a question. Does being rich, incredibly rich and incredibly famous and getting everything you could ever want, does that seem to, in your understanding of how these things work, equate to a really happy, healthy home? Right? So, read one of those tabloid magazines that you want. All right, the words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise bring healing. You're given a choice of whether to pierce people like swords or bring about their healing. Which are you going to choose? Those who are kind benefit themselves, but the cruel bring ruin on themselves. And we can do a whole series on that. The wise woman builds up her house, but with her own hands, the foolish one tears hers down. A hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms the quarrel. One who loves a pure heart and who speaks with grace will have the king for a friend. What's beautiful about this is, I think there's something prophetic about that. I think that when we love a pure heart and speak with grace, I think it honors God, the King of Kings. So other biblical examples. Stick with me. We're wrapping this up here. Romans 12, Paul says, do not be conformed to this world. Do not be conformed to the patterns of this world. Don't do things the way that everyone else does things. Don't allow the way that people around you deal with relationships. Don't allow the cultural understanding of commitment, or the cultural understanding of love, or the cultural understanding of marriage and family. Don't let that conform you, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what the will of God is, what the good and acceptable and perfect will, what wisdom really is. Wisdom is God's will for us to live out in our lives. This is a controversial one at times. Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands, as is fitting to the Lord. And husbands, love your wives, and do not be harsh with them. This was super controversial when Paul wrote it, but not because of the wives submitting to their husbands' part, but because he calls the men to reciprocate that sort of submission. He says, listen, in any relationship, in these relationships, especially the more intimate it is, the more important it is for you to have. You treat each other the way that God treats you. And you do your best to reflect the character of God to that person. And this is how we live out godly marriages and godly relationships. Children, obey your parents in everything. Okay, I forgot that. Sorry. For this pleases the Lord. Fathers, do not bitter your children, or they will become discouraged. Matthew 7, this is Jesus said, speaking. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. 1 Peter 4:8 says, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. That sounds a lot like the Proverbs that we read earlier. God's wisdom didn't change for the several thousand years between Solomon and Jesus. And it hasn't changed in the last 2,000 years for us. Okay, so if you have to decide, err on the side of being a person of godly character. It's not always going to benefit you. Right? It's not always going to you're not always going to see the benefits right away. It's not always going to be like, hey, if you act with character and act in a godly way, there are times where you're literally left with the choice. I can do something dishonest and get gains from it. And oftentimes that's within relationships. But what kind of people are we going to be? In your relationship, strive to be someone of godly character. Okay, so that's 3 principles, super easy. How you doing with those? Right? How you doing with them? So, yeah, like you guys got this. This was just review, right? So you have principle number 1, relationships shape you. So be careful with them. And this is a little bit tough because, like, are there relationships in your life that you probably need to cultivate less? It's not that we're unloving or don't care about people, but you know, bad company corrupts good morals, right? Walk with the wise if you want to. Are there relationships that you need to pursue? You need to put yourself around more people who are wise. One of the things that I realized as a pastor, what I need to do is put myself around other pastors. And it's something I try to do more and more in my life, because I often walk away from those conversations and those moments, not being like, I couldn't put my finger on, oh, this is why that was encouraging, or, oh, I'm so much better off because of this. I couldn't show you the exact reason why, but I find myself like uplifted, having more vision, having more patience, having more, when you put yourselves in the right places, it develops within you the character that you need. Do you need to walk with more wise people in your lives? Are there relationships that you need to put a little distance in your life? Second principle is this: good relationships are precious. They're a gift from God. What are you doing with the good relationships in your life? Are you cultivating them? Are you protecting them? Are you caring for them? And the last principle is this: in your relationships, are you striving to be someone of godly character? Or are you selfish and self-centered when it comes to those? Here's the challenges of Proverbs. So wise relationships. Wisdom, that should be in. Wisdom in relationships is difficult to develop, but God gives us the help that we need. John 13:34, we already read this, but a new commandment I give you, to love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. The beautiful thing about Jesus is he is the prophetic, he's the prophetic fulfillment of the questions we're left at the end of Proverbs. So when you read through Proverbs, the thing you're supposed to think is like, well, how in the world am I ever supposed to do this? How in the world could I ever possibly walk out this kind of wisdom? Like Solomon, who wrote most of these, you see there was often a disconnect between what he knew to do and his ability to walk it out. Like, how am I going to do it? And here comes Jesus and says, look, I'm giving you a new command. A command that fulfills those is this: as I have loved you, you must love one another. Wise relationships for us as followers, it's through Jesus we gain the ability to have wisdom in our relationships. So we'll finish with this question. What are the relationships in your life where you need God's wisdom? If you say none, I want you to just put your thinking caps on. Try again. What are those relationships in which you need wisdom? James 1:5 says that if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. So I ask again, what are the relationships in your life where you need God's wisdom? So let's take time and pray for wisdom. You stand to your feet and we'll finish with prayer as we've got to process through. God, you're good to us. And when we read your scripture, we're challenged by it. And I'm so thankful that we're challenged by it. I'm so thankful it's not like, oh yeah, we've reached the pinnacle where we're at. But that we're growing and that we're walking with you. And then when we look at Proverbs and it tells us to be wise in the way that we deal with one another, the way that we deal with our spouses, the way that we deal with our children, the way that we deal with our parents, the way that we deal with brothers and sisters, the way we deal with friends and neighbors and those that you've brought into our lives. There's so much wisdom there it's just overwhelming, and we're left with the question about how could we possibly live our lives with this kind of wisdom? That you don't leave that question unanswered, but you tell us in the book of James that if you lack wisdom, to ask God, and He provides it. So, Lord Jesus, we are asking you to please provide us wisdom. Jesus. Some of us need wisdom where we work, in those relationships. Some of us need wisdom in our own homes, in those relationships. Some of us need wisdom in the way that we navigate the difficult relationships of siblings and friends and parents, other loved ones. God, we need your wisdom. And so we ask for it. God, please give us your wisdom as we seek to live out this life well, not just for our own benefit, but to reflect your character in our lives. It's an awesome opportunity you give us, and we take it seriously. So, Lord, help us to be wise in the way that we approach the relationships that you've given us in our lives. For those of us who need to maybe take a step back from certain relationships, help us to do that. For those of us who need to cultivate a deeper intimacy and a deeper connection in other places, help us to do that. And Lord, for all of us, I ask that you bring those people into our lives that will help us through wise counsel and through being connected to you. Help us to connect to one another in that way. So we thank you for the opportunity we have to make wise choices in our relationships. So God, I thank you for your church that you've brought us here, not just to have this religious ritual of church, but to learn from one another and learn from you and to connect to you. God, I ask that you would help us to connect to you in a deep way, that the relationship at the center of all of this is our relationship with you. And that's the source for wisdom in any relationship, in all relationships. So Lord, help us cultivate that relationship. Help us to do the hard work of connecting to you, submitting to you, being followers of you. So, God, I thank you for your church that you brought us here to walk this path together. So I pray a prayer of blessing on each and every one here, that you would bless them and keep them, that your face would shine upon them, that you lift up your countenance upon each and every one of them, that you give them grace and peace and rest, and help us operate from the peace of God in our lives. And help us, Lord, give us wisdom as we pursue wisdom in our relationships. We pray these things in the powerful name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Guys, thanks for being here. Thank you for being a part of what we're doing. And let's be the church God's calling us to be